The night began like any other, with the hum of city lights spilling across the streets. But by dawn, a man's entire life would be recast as a nightmare. His name was Daniel Mercer, a 28-year-old school teacher, beloved by his students, steady in his routines and invisible in the chaos of the world, until, in one breath, a single accusation turned him from educator to predator, from respected neighbor to social outcast. The phone call that woke him at 6:12 a.m. was not just an interruption of sleep, it was the death of his old identity, Mr. Mercer. The voice on the other end was official, flat, but beneath its neutrality lingered the weight of judgment. "We need you to come down to the station. It's important." Daniel sat upright, confusion knotting in his chest. "What's this about?" he asked, his voice dry. "You'll be brief when you arrive," the officer replied. And then the line went dead. The morning light poured through his blinds, unforgiving, as he dressed in silence. He didn't know then that every stitch of clothing, every movement, would later be scrutinized in court. By the time he reached the station, uniformed officers were already waiting. Their eyes gave away more than their words ever could. To them, he wasn't walking in as a man to answer questions. He was walking in as a suspect. Inside the interrogation room, the air smelled of metal and disinfectant. A camera light blinked steadily in the corner, recording every twitch of his face. Across the table sat Detective Harris, her gaze sharp and unwavering. She slid a manila folder forward, its contents hidden but heavy with implication. "Daniel Mercer," she began, "last night, a young woman filed a statement accusing you of sexual assault." The words detonated in the silence. "Assault, rape." His chest tightened, his throat dry as sandpaper. He stared, unable to process, until Harris leaned closer. "She claims it happened nights ago. She is adamant." "Do you deny being with her?" Daniel's mind raced. He thought of his week, grading papers at home, lesson plans on his laptop, video calls with his parents. "I don't even know who you're talking about," he stammered. "I am not a rapist." But words meant little inside those walls. Every denial sounded like a rehearsed lie. Every flicker of nervousness, like guilt. Harris scribbled notes, her silence more damning than her questions. When she finally stood, the scrape of her chair on the linoleum floor was louder than her voice. "You'll need to stay available. This investigation is only beginning." Outside, the world had already shifted. The young woman's accusation spread faster than facts ever could. Social media platforms became digital courtrooms. Strangers quick to condemn. "Monster, predator, keep him away from children." His name trended, not as the teacher who had inspired dozens of students, but as the man accused of something unspeakable. Daniel's friends called, some out of concern, others to keep their distance. His school placed him on immediate leave, citing protection of students and staff. Neighbors whispered when he stepped outside, mothers pulling children closer as though his presence alone carried contamination. The presumption of innocence was a concept reserved for textbooks, not for real life. Nights became unbearable, every shadow seemed hostile, every sound amplified. He replayed the interrogation in his mind, the detective's eyes drilling into him as though searching for cracks. But there was nothing to confess, nothing to reveal because the crime had never happened. Still, doubt worked like a slow poison. He caught himself questioning his memory, combing through recent days as if somewhere he might find a mistake that explained this nightmare. Then came the knock at his door. Not neighbors, not friends, officers, again. This time, they didn't ask. They commanded, "Daniel Mercer, you are under arrest for the charge of sexual assault." The metallic click of the handcuffs sealed his fate in that moment. He was pushed into the back of a patrol car, the city blurring around him. To passersby, he wasn't a teacher anymore, he was a criminal in plain sight. At the station, the booking process stripped him of his identity piece by piece. Fingerprints pressed into ink, mugshots under harsh fluorescent light, belongings taken and sealed in plastic. The holding cell smelled of sweat and fear, its walls painted with the graffiti of forgotten men. Daniel sat on the cold bench, heart pounding, while others eyed him with curiosity or contempt. It didn't matter that he swore his innocence, and their innocence was irrelevant hours later. When he was finally released on bail, the damage had already spread like wildfire. His face appeared on local news segments. His name, once attached to student achievements and glowing parent testimonials, was now tethered to the ugliest of headlines. Even his parents, watching from their living room, struggled to believe, not because they doubted him, but because the gravity of the charge was too enormous to reconcile. The accuser's name, shielded by law, remained hidden. She was described only as a young woman, anonymous and protected. Meanwhile, Daniel's life was laid bare, every detail dissected. Reporters camped outside his home. Online forums filled with theories. Some believed him, most didn't. Sleep abandoned him entirely. He sat awake at 3 a.m., staring at his reflection in the darkened window. The words echoed over and over in his mind. I am not a rapist. But the more he repeated them, the less they sounded like a defense and more like a plea. To whom? He didn't know. The law, society, himself. And then, as though fate hadn't already sharpened its blade, new evidence was announced. The detective contacted him again. The young woman claimed she had text messages, photographs, proof of their encounter, proof she framed as non-consensual, proof that could dismantle his every word. Daniel's hands shook as he read the headlines the next morning. Local teacher facing mounting evidence and assault case. The walls of his apartment seemed to close in, suffocating him in their silence. He wondered if he'd ever breathe freely again, because in this story, truth was already buried beneath the weight of accusation. And yet, as the investigation deepened, small cracks began to appear in the case against him. Cracks that hinted at a truth darker and more complicated than anyone could imagine. But by then, the question was no longer whether Daniel was innocent. The question was whether the system, the public, and the people who once knew him would ever allow him to prove it. The cell door clanged shut behind him, its metallic echo reverberating like a verdict in his skull. Daniel sat on the bench, knees drawn up, trying to steady his breathing. He told himself this was temporary, that the truth would rise above the noise. But the truth, he was beginning to realize, was only as powerful as the people willing to believe it. And at that moment, belief was his rarest commodity. The detectives returned the next morning. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead as Daniel was led back into the same sterile interrogation room. Detective Harris entered with a folder bulging thicker than before, her partner trailing behind. They didn't sit immediately. Instead, they loomed, letting the silence stretch until it felt like rope tightening around his throat. Daniel, Harris began, flipping open the folder. Your accuser provided us with a detailed statement. She says you met her at a bar 3 nights ago. You bought her drinks, and later, you forced yourself on her. Daniel's mouth went dry. That's not true. I wasn't even at a bar that night. I was home, alone. I can show you my lesson plans. Emails. Emails don't stop you from leaving your apartment, Harris interrupted sharply. She slid a few photographs across the table. Blurry images of him, standing outside a downtown bar. Timestamp. The grainy quality made him squint. It was him, but from when? He couldn't place the exact night. Look at the timeline. Harris pressed. She says you were together after this. She's given us text messages, too. She handed over printouts. Words filled the page, suggestive, flirtatious, even explicit. Words Daniel swore he never wrote. His eyes widened as he scanned the thread. His name displayed at the top. His voice cracked when he spoke. This isn't me. I didn't write these. Harris leaned back, arms crossed, skepticism etched into her every movement. So you're saying these are fabricated? Yes. His voice rose, desperation bleeding through. I don't know how, but this isn't real. You have to believe me. But the detectives didn't deal in belief. They dealt in evidence. And at that moment, the evidence painted him as a liar. The partner scribbled notes, muttering under his breath. Juries eat this stuff up. Daniel's stomach churned. He could see it now, his face on courtroom screens, those text messages projected larger than life. His protests drowned out by the damning silence of a jury box. Outside the interrogation room, the storm was already raging. News stations ran primetime segments, anchors speaking his name with a tone of condemnation masked as neutrality. "The community is in shock," one reporter announced, standing in front of his school. "A man once trusted with children is now facing accusations of a heinous crime." Parents demanded answers, some calling for his permanent removal, others rallying to protect our daughters. His colleagues, once warm and supportive, now avoided his calls. A single email from the school board informed him he was suspended without pay. Pending investigation. The word stung more than he expected. They hadn't even asked for his side of the story. But the true dagger came when his parents visited him. His mother's eyes were red, her hands trembling as she reached across the table. "Danny," she whispered, "tell me this isn't true." Her voice cracked on the last word, as though part of her feared it might be. "It's not," he said firmly, though his voice wavered. "Mom, you raised me. You know me. I would never." His father remained silent, jaw clenched, staring at him with a look Daniel had never seen before. It wasn't hatred. It wasn't even anger. It was disappointment, the kind that cuts deeper than any accusation. Nights blurred together, filled with restless pacing, the constant glow of his phone screen, and the ceaseless barrage of messages. Some were threats, "Hope you rot." Others were from strangers offering support, though even those felt hollow, performative. His world had split into believers and condemners, and the condemners were winning by sheer volume. Then came the preliminary hearing. The courthouse steps swarmed with cameras, microphones shoved in his face as he was escorted inside. "Do you have anything to say to your victim?" one reporter shouted. The word victim lodged in his throat like glass. Victim. That was how she was described before a single piece of evidence had been tested. Inside, the prosecutor laid out their case. In broad strokes, a young woman, vulnerable, manipulated by a man in a position of trust. They spoke of text messages, photographs, her emotional testimony. Daniel's attorney objected, reminding the judge that evidence had yet to be authenticated. But the damage was done. The words hung heavy in the courtroom, shaping perceptions long before a trial date was set. As the gavel struck, setting a timeline for discovery, Daniel glanced across the room. For the first time, he saw her as accuser. She sat in the gallery, flanked by advocates, her expression unreadable. She looked small, fragile even, for a fleeting second. He wondered if this was all some colossal mistake, if she had misidentified him, if confusion had spiraled into catastrophe. But then her eyes met his, and in that cold, unwavering stare, he saw something else entirely. Not fear, not confusion, certainty. The certainty of someone who had already convinced the world. Later that night, as he sat with his attorney, a private investigator entered the room with a folder of his own. "We're digging," the investigator said, "and something doesn't add up." He spread photos across the table, social media posts from the night of the alleged assault. The accuser smiling with friends, timestamped near midnight. A location tag placing her miles away from where she claimed to be. Daniel's heart pounded. For the first time in weeks, a flicker of hope pierced the fog. Evidence. Real evidence. The kind that could crack her story wide open. But hope is fragile in a system that thrives on spectacle. Because just as the investigator revealed this lifeline, the prosecutor announced plans to bring in an expert witness, a digital forensic analyst, who claimed the text messages had been verified, tied directly to Daniel's phone. Daniel felt the walls closing in again. His truth was now a tug-of-war between the narratives, each fighting for dominance. And as he lay awake in his darkened apartment, his mind replayed the accuser's stare. That haunting certainty etched into her face. What did she know that he didn't? And why did it feel like the real battle hadn't even begun yet? The truth hides in shadows, and sometimes the loudest story is the one that blinds everyone from seeing it. As Daniel's life unraveled in the public eye, his accuser's narrative stood tall, almost untouchable. To the world, she was a young woman who had bravely come forward. Her face blurred on television, but her voice echoed in every headline. Yet behind the curtain of public sympathy, her story carried cracks, hairline fractures invisible to most, but devastating if pulled apart. Daniel's investigator, a weary man named Cole Maddox with sharp eyes that missed nothing, began pulling threads the moment he saw those social media posts. "I've worked cases like this," he told Daniel across the dim glow of a diner booth. "Stories fall apart when you pressure them in the right places. She's either telling the truth or she's building a performance. Let's find out which." He slid his laptop across the table, showing a series of screenshots. Photos of the accuser, her name, Claire Renshaw, now exposed to Daniel for the first time dancing with friends on the very night she claimed to be with him. The timestamps told a different story than her sworn statement. "She says she left the bar with you around 11, Cole explained. "But look here, 11:37. She's tagged at a club across town. Then at 12:04, another selfie, same group. She doesn't look distressed. She looks fine." Daniel stared at the images, his pulse quickening. Why would she lie? What would she gain from this? Cole shrugged, sipping his coffee. "That's the question. Maybe attention, maybe revenge, or maybe it's something deeper. But trust me, lies don't exist in a vacuum. They leave residue." Meanwhile, the prosecutor's office doubled down, waving the verified text messages like a sword. According to their expert, the messages had originated from Daniel's phone, backed by carrier records. His attorney fought to challenge the evidence, arguing the possibility of spoofing, manipulation, or stolen access. But legal battles are fought on credibility as much as fact, and right now, Claire's credibility outweighed Daniel's in the eyes of the public. The weight of it all pressed heavily on him. Walking through the city, he felt eyes burning into his skin. A woman clutched her child's hand tighter as he passed. A group of teenagers jeered, one spitting the word rapist under his breath. Even the corner store clerk, once friendly, now avoided eye contact, sliding Daniel's change across the counter as though distance itself could prevent contamination. At night, Daniel's apartment became a prison. He replayed the interrogation, the hearing, his mother's trembling question. "Tell me this isn't true," he whispered into the silence. Again and again, "I didn't do this. I didn't do this." But the walls never answered back. Cole kept digging. He unearthed fragments of Claire's past, a history of strained relationships, a pattern of dramatic accusations, though never on the scale. One former friend described her as a storm in human form, beautiful but dangerous. Another hinted at jealousy, grudges, the kind of emotions that could twist truth into something unrecognizable. Yet, publicly, she played the part flawlessly. She appeared in interviews with her face concealed, her voice softened by audio distortion. "I just want justice," she said, words trembling with practiced vulnerability. "He took something from me I can never get back." Daniel watched the clip late one night, fists clenched. He didn't recognize the woman on the screen, not her voice, not her story, not even her pain. It was like watching a stranger build a prison around him brick by brick. The pressure escalated as the trial date loomed. His attorney explained it bluntly. "If we can't dismantle her credibility, we're sunk. The jury won't ignore her tears, her story, those messages. We need a counterpunch." The counterpunch came in the form of a quiet discovery. Cole managed to track down a man named Tyler Briggs, who had dated Claire briefly. Tyler hesitated to speak at first, but when pressed, he revealed something chilling. "She accused me too," Tyler said, his voice low. "Not of rape, but of stalking, harassment. Said I wouldn't leave her alone. She told all her friends. Nearly cost me my job. None of it was true. When I called her out, she just moved on, like it never happened." Daniel's attorney leaned forward. "Would you be willing to testify to that?" Tyler hesitated, fear flickering in his eyes. "She's unpredictable, and if she could do this to you, to me, she could do it again. But yeah, if it means stopping her, I'll testify." It was a turning point, a glimmer of light in the suffocating darkness. But the legal system doesn't move on glimmers. The prosecution prepared their witnesses, their experts, their airtight timeline. And with every news story, every whisper in the streets, Daniel felt the scales tipping further against him. The weeks before the trial were hell. He lost weight, his hair thinning from stress. His parents stopped visiting as often. Too exhausted by the whispers in their own community, he heard his father had been asked to step down from his volunteer work at the church. Guilt gnawed at Daniel's insides, not for what he'd been accused of, but for the collateral damage bleeding into every corner of his family's life. And then came the leak. Somehow, Claire's full written statement found its way online. It spread like wildfire across forums, dissected by strangers who debated his guilt with the detachment of spectators at a sport. She described him as charming, calculated, predatory. She claimed she remembered every detail, every smell, every sound. The vividness of her account sickened Daniel, not because it was true, but because it was so carefully constructed. Yet buried within the statement was a detail that made Cole's eyes light up when he read it aloud. He drove me home after the assault in a silver sedan with a cracked windshield. Cole looked up at Daniel. You don't own a car, do you? Daniel shook his head. Never have. I take the train everywhere. Cole grinned grimly. That's a crack we can use. Still, cracks alone wouldn't save him. The trial would be brutal, his life dissected, his name dragged further through the mud. And as the first day approached, Daniel felt like a man standing on the edge of a cliff, the crowd below chanting for him to fall. On the eve of trial, he sat alone in his apartment, staring at the darkness beyond the window. Somewhere in that city, Claire was preparing to rehearsing her story, steeling herself for the spotlight. Two lives about to collide in the arena of justice, but only one destined to leave intact. The silence broke when his phone buzzed. An unknown number, a text message. He opened it, and his blood ran cold. I know she's lying. Meet me tomorrow. Don't tell anyone. The courthouse loomed like a fortress, its stone steps slick from the morning rain. Daniel stood at the bottom, shoulders heavy beneath the gaze of cameras lined up in neat, predatory rows. Reporters shouted his name, their questions slicing through the damp air. Do you have a message for your victim? Are you pleading guilty today? How does it feel knowing your career is over? He kept his head down, his attorney's hand firm on his back, guiding him through the storm and into the belly of judgment. Inside, the air was colder, sterile, humming with anticipation. Jurors filed in one by one, their eyes flicking briefly toward Daniel before settling elsewhere. He studied their faces, searching for a hint of sympathy, but found only blank masks. To them, he was a headline brought to life, a puzzle waiting to be solved, and puzzles, he knew, were rarely solved in favor of the accused. The prosecution wasted no time. They painted Claire as vulnerable, unsuspecting, lured in by Daniel's charm before being trapped in a nightmare. They presented the text messages as their crown jewel lines of dialogue projected across the courtroom screen, each word like a dagger. Come over tonight. No one has to know. Don't tell anyone about this. You liked it. Admit it. Daniel shook his head silently, his chest tightening as jurors scribbled notes. He wanted to stand, to scream that these weren't his words, that he had never written them. But his attorney's steady hand on his arm kept him anchored. This was a game of patience, of strategy. An outburst were the quickest way to lose. The forensic analyst took the stand next, a bespectacled man with the calm confidence of someone used to being believed. He explained the chain of evidence, the phone records, the metadata tying the messages to Daniel's number, to a high degree of certainty. The expert concluded, these texts originated from the defendant's device. The words struck like a hammer. Certainty. Jurors love certainty. But Daniel's attorney rose, sharp as a blade, slicing into the testimony with precision. Isn't it true, he asked, that text messages can be spoofed, manipulated, or sent through third-party applications to mimic another number? The analyst hesitated. In rare cases, yes. So you cannot say with 100% certainty that my client authored these messages, can you? A pause. No, not with absolute certainty. It was a small victory, but in a trial where perception mattered more than fact, small victories could bloom into lifelines. During recess, Daniel's phone buzzed again. A new message from the same unknown number. She's done this before. I can prove it. After court. Don't trust anyone else. His stomach flipped. He showed the screen to his attorney, who frowned. Could be a setup. Could be someone looking to cash in on your desperation. Or it could be the truth. Daniel whispered, and the truth is all I have left. As the defense began presenting their case, Cole introduced Tyler Briggs to the stand. Nervous but resolute, Tyler recounted his history with Claire, the false accusations, the smear campaign she'd launched against him, the way she'd moved on once the damage was done. She thrives on drama, Tyler said, his voice cracking. She knows how to make people believe her. She almost ruined me, and now she's doing it again. The courtroom buzzed. For the first time, jurors leaned forward, curiosity pricking through their guarded expressions. The prosecution objected, painting Tyler as a bitter ex-boyfriend, seeking revenge. But the seed of doubt had been planted, and seeds, once sown, could grow wild. Then came the silver sedan detail. Cole presented DMV records, proving Daniel had never owned a car, never even held a valid driver's license. Yet in her sworn statement, Cole argued, Claire claims my client drove her home in a silver sedan with a cracked windshield. The car doesn't exist. The ride never happened. Gasps rippled through the gallery. Claire's attorney shifted uncomfortably, the prosecution scrambling to frame the inconsistency as a trauma-induced memory lapse. But to the jury, it was another crack, another reason to question. Despite these breakthroughs, the weight of public judgment still hung heavy. Protesters gathered outside the courthouse each day, chanting slogans, holding signs with Daniel's face plastered beneath the word rapist. News anchors dissected the trial with grim certainty. Their segments skewed toward guilt. Even his parents, sitting in the gallery, looked smaller each day, worn down by whispers and stares. The defense's momentum grew, but Daniel knew it all hinged on one thing: Claire herself. She had yet to take the stand, and when she did, her testimony would either shatter or solidify everything. On the third day of trial, the moment arrived. Claire walked into the courtroom with calculated fragility, her hair pulled back, her clothes modest, her expression crafted with precision. She clutched the tissue in her hand, her shoulders trembling just enough to be noticed. Jurors' eyes softened as she sat, adjusting the microphone with nervous hands. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? The bailiff asked. I do, she whispered, her voice breaking. Daniel's pulse hammered in his ears. He could feel the room tilting toward her, bending beneath the gravity of her performance. His attorney scribbled notes furiously, Cole's eyes narrowing from the gallery, and as Claire began to speak, her voice trembling with the weight of rehearsed pain, Daniel realized that no matter how much evidence they had, no matter how many cracks they exposed, it would come down to this moment, her story against his silence. But just as her testimony began to weave its spell, Daniel's phone buzzed again. A new message lit up the screen, its words sharp as a blade. If she lies under oath today, everything changes. Meet me tonight. I have the proof. The final morning of trial dawned gray and heavy, the sky pressing down on the courthouse like a lid sealing a coffin. Reporters crowded the steps, cameras flashing, microphones thrust forward as Daniel walked in under the weight of whispers. Inside, the courtroom buzzed with a low, nervous energy, spectators sensing that today would decide everything. The prosecutor stood first, voice rising with righteous conviction. This is not about confusion. This is not about jealousy. This is about accountability. Claire Renshaw told you what happened to her. She told you how Daniel Mercer used his charm as a weapon. Do not let him hide behind excuses and distractions. She deserves justice. Send her a message that her courage matters. Each word pounded against Daniel's chest. He watched the jury carefully, searching for cracks in their faces, for signs of doubt or worse, agreement. Some avoided his gaze, their expressions unreadable, others scribbled furiously, their pens like silent hammers building his coffin. Then came the defense. Daniel's attorney rose, calm, but burning with urgency. Ladies and gentlemen, this case is not about courage. It is about truth, and the truth is tangled in contradictions. Claire's story shifts with every telling cars that don't exist, timelines that don't align. You heard from Hannah, her own friend, who showed you Claire's words. Words of manipulation, not trauma. If you convict Daniel Mercer on this testimony, you are not serving justice. You are serving a lie, and that lie will destroy a man's life forever. The room vibrated with tension as the jury was dismissed to deliberate. Hours crawled by like days. Daniel sat in silence, his pulse thundering in his ears, every tick of the clock slicing another piece of his sanity. He tried not to imagine the worst, but the images came unbidden: prison bars, his mother crying in the back row, strangers whispering rape is for the rest of his life. When the jury finally returned, their faces were grave, unreadable. The foreman clutched a slip of paper, hand steady, eyes forward. On the charge of sexual assault, the judge asked, "How do you find the defendant?" The pause was unbearable. Daniel's breath caught, his entire existence suspended in that silence. "Not guilty." The words hit the air like a thunderclap. Gasps erupted in the gallery. Daniel's knees buckled, his hands trembling uncontrollably as relief washed over him, and a tidal wave so overwhelming he nearly collapsed. His attorney gripped his shoulder firmly, grounding him. Claire sat rigid, her face a mask of disbelief, her jaw clenched so tight it looked carved from stone. For the first time, her eyes darted away, unable to meet the gaze of the jury or Daniel's. The judge dismissed the case, the gavel striking with finality. Daniel was free, legally. His name was cleared. But as he walked out of that courtroom, blinking into the flashes of cameras and the hungry questions of reporters, he knew the truth was far more complicated. Because not guilty did not mean innocent in the eyes of the world. The news spread like wildfire, split down the middle. Some hailed justice served, others condemned the jury as blind, convinced a predator had walked free. Online, hashtags flourished, his name tethered forever to words like assault and trial. Employers hesitated, friends fell silent, strangers stared, though the court had freed him. Society kept him in chains. Daniel returned to his apartment that night, the silence deafening. He looked around at the wreckage of his life: job applications unanswered, relationships broken, the lingering shadow of suspicion that would never fade. His phone buzzed. Another message. This one from an unknown number. "You were lucky. But remember, once accused, always accused." His blood ran cold. Hannah stayed in touch for a while, offering support, but she defaded. Consumed by her own guilt and exhaustion, Claire vanished from the public eye. But whispers followed her in new cities, new jobs, her name surfacing in forums and quiet rumors about lies told before. Yet she never faced charges, never answered for the perjury or the devastation she caused. Daniel's life became a ghost of what it once was. He walked streets with his head down, conversation stopping when he entered a room. He felt eyes on him, always questioning, always doubting. He won in court, but he lost in life. Late one night, staring out the window at the city below, he whispered to himself, almost like a prayer. I am not a rapist. The words felt hollow, carried away by the hum of distant traffic, because the truth was bitter. Brutal and irreversible false allegations don't end with a verdict. They linger, they stain, they haunt, and somewhere, Claire's words still echo like a curse. Watch how fast they believe me. The camera of fate pulled back on Daniel's silhouette against the city lights, a man free, but forever marked, a life shattered not by guilt, but by a lie. And in that silence, one chilling thought remained if one life could do this. How many more lives had already been broken the same way? Their voices drowned out, their truths buried.